We are now through 7 weeks of the NFL season, and I've got good news and I've got bad news. The bad news is Chris Godwin is dead. The good news is there are lots of really exciting wide receivers on the waiver wire this week. This is Stat Chasing.
Jalen McMillan is my official guess from the University of Washington.
A deep shot. Again, he's got McMillan. Jalen McMillan. Touchdown. Caught. A touchdown for McMillan.
Go Dogs.
We had to roll the McMillan clip, Draco. I'm sure that he's going to go for a pretty penny in Fab leagues.
Yeah, it is wide receiver week on the Fab waiver wire. So thought that would be a good maybe change up to talk about and maybe focus more on this week.
Yeah, I mean, lots of our favorite exciting rookie prospects are now the key pieces to target on the waiver wire this week. We've got Jalen McMillions, we have Rizzy Pearsall, so very fun nicknames. And potentially good fantasy production there. Although I'm not
Troy Franklin too. Troy Franklin.
Man, I know you really want Troy Franklin to happen, but I'm pretty worried. The worst thing that the NFL could have done for our Bo Nix hope was to put the Broncos on an island game, because I got to watch every single one of Bo Nix's pass attempts, and let me tell you, that whole preseason narrative, when we were talking about like, how Bo Nix actually was a pretty good deep passer, his numbers just got skewed. His average yards per attempt got skewed because he did all this like rinky-dink check down stuff, and if you filter that out, he's actually an insane deep ball passer. Yeah, I think I'm done with the if you filter out the majority of this guy's attempts, then he actually looks like this type of analysis. I don't think I'm buying that anymore. If I really skew the data to make it look like what I want to show, then he's actually good. Because I got to watch Bo Nix, and he's not actually good.
I mean, my counter, and I know we're not into charts here, but Troy Franklin in particular. So they kept his scaled up route percentage, so he's at 67%, and then he had a 27% targets per run. So
the usage.
That's a good rookie. That's a great rookie wide receiver story.
Right. Yeah. To be clear, none of what I'm saying is negative about Troy Franklin, although he doesn't look super great to me. I think a lot of the bullish metrics that we're seeing, I think, is really just coming down to the chemistry he has with Nix already. But really, I'm pretty concerned that Bo Nix stinks at passing the ball. He seems like perfectly cromulent for what the Broncos need to do, which is like, hey, go out there and like when you miss on your throws, just make sure you're missing into an area of the field where no one is, not your receivers, no defenders. Like throw it somewhere where people who are watching the game will be like, how did you possibly throw it to that area of the field? You didn't even see anyone there. It's like you're only throwing to the places with green grass. So that's fine because his mistakes aren't costly; they're just comical. But yeah, that's the thing I'm pretty worried about with Bo Nix. But it's not going to stop me from playing him this week against the Carolina Panthers.
They've got the Panthers, then they've got the Ravens. So that's like I mean, if you're looking for a spot start at receiver, I think that's pretty interesting. Like I think it's at least as interesting as the other kind of guys.
Yeah, let's get into the QB chart here, so we have some context when we're talking about Bo Nix.
Right. Yeah. We'll go back to the after our segue. We'll go back to our normal kind of content schedule. So we've got our QB volume and efficiency. We've got volume on the horizontal axis from expected points from passing, then adjusted yards per attempt with the vertical axis, and then the size of the bubble corresponds to rushing yards per game.
So I guess we can talk a little bit more about Bo Nix here, because I do think the matchup is interesting. You get the Carolina Panthers, who have just looked absolutely dreadful on defense. I mean, you pretty much can do whatever you want against the Panthers. So if I was going to throw any cold water on the, hey, this is a good matchup for Bo Nix, the first piece of cold water would be, well, the Broncos can do whatever they want and be successful. And I think they'll probably just want to run the ball. And then number two is, even if the defense is bad, the defense being bad does not help Bo Nix put the ball on his target. The defense was bad on Thursday night, and he couldn't put the ball on the target. And not even like on the target. Like if we were talking like Bo Nix is in a shooting range and trying to hit, the cutout of the person, the silhouette, right? Like, sometimes you're off target, you hit the arm or something, or, oh, you weren't center mass, you're like kind of on the fringe. Bo Nix is like hitting someone else's target halfway across the shooting range. Like,
you know who he didn't miss?
Who?
Troy Franklin for 7. He got 6 targets. Oh shit! How many? I fucked that up. 6 targets, 5 receptions. I knew it was a number like that. So that's a pretty good completion rate.
What was the average depth of target on those?
Average depth of target was about 8.8.
Okay, so definitely not pushing
real
the ball
passes,
but they're not like these little tiny, at the line of scrimmage or behind the line of scrimmage.
Right. They're wearing all bubble screens or stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like I don't want to be too negative on Bo Nix, because like I'll definitely I'm interested in. It's kind of hard to play Bo Nix this week, I think, unless you're playing like salary cap DFS. Like if you're doing DraftKings, I haven't looked at the slate at all on DraftKings yet, so I don't know what Nix's price is. I would assume it's pretty low, but he would really only be someone that I'm going to for salary relief. I think it's pretty hard to play that game,
right?
Bring back too. So
you're bringing me right back on track to the Bo Nix play, which is perfectly reasonable. Yeah, he's a tough play. He's a tough play. The offense is not great overall. It does seem like they trust him with the ball, so he gets volume. He does have rushing upside, which helps. Like, I think he's he's just your kind of classic cheap rushing upside quarterback who can, at a cheap price tag, can definitely get there.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the more you talk about it, if he's super cheap and Franklin is super cheap, maybe you could talk me into like Nix and Franklin, skinny stack is just like major salary relief. But I think we've probably spent plenty of time discussing Bo Nix. But yeah, the rushing upside does help. Another guy whose rushing upside helps, we don't have to spend really any time on this guy, but I just have to give him his flowers. Lamar Jackson is like so far and away the MVP in the league, and I don't think it's particularly close. Like, Jaden Daniels had a really fun stretch, and honestly, like, we can't take anything away from Daniels because he gets injured and knocked out early. What should have been a game where he could go hang some absolutely video game type numbers against the Panthers. But I mean, Lamar is just so insane. He's like far and away the QB1 in my mind. Real life and fantasy.
Yeah, easily QB1. And Bo Nix 5,600, by the way.
Okay, yeah, so cheap, but like probably not cheap enough to make me super excited about it. A guy that I am kind of interested in, and I haven't like really let this one marinate all the way, so I'm really interested in your opinion on this one. But Joe Burrow, kind of like a ho-hum day against the Browns. I mean, like, he has
This is a tough matchup. This is a really tough matchup.
That you think the Eagles are a tough defense?
I mean, PFF thinks they've got great pass coverage. Thinks they've got a great pass rush. Their pass rate over expected is negative, so they run a lot. They're playing against a defense that is weak to the run, and so you do have, like, if I'm just looking at the numbers, their pass defense is good, and they are kind of a run funnel on defense too. So they're a run funnel, and then they're a run heavy team. Bengals a run funnel. You're talking about Burrow with Chase and T Higgins, like that. That's pretty like strongly talented set there. Like I never want to like be betting like against those guys, but I think a lot of the contextual stuff is pretty rough this week for the Bengals passing attack.
The thing that I the biggest fly in the ointment for me in this matchup is that the Eagles are run heavy and that the Bengals can be run on, and that's the part that concerns me the most, is just that you lose the play volume here. I actually think the Eagles' pass defense might not be as good as PFF thinks, because let me tell you who they played so far. Right, they play the Packers in their opening game. Packers hang 29 on them there. Then they play the Falcons in week 2. This is while Kirk Cousins was still like, they were baby kid gloves on Kirk Cousins. Then they play the Saints in week 3. Not a passing juggernaut there. Then they play the Bucs, and the Bucs just smoke them. The Bucs absolutely dog walk them, put up 33 on them. Then they play the Browns, worst quarterback in the league, and then they play the Giants, also one of the worst quarterbacks in the league. So if we look at the people that they've actually played, I see Daniel Jones, who's a bottom left quadrant quarterback. I see Deshaun Watson.
You don't think PFF are kind of like adjusting? Because I think that to me, that's the big differentiator over using PFF over some of the kind of like just overall metric, like actual metrics. Like that's kind of like the differentiator. Like 49ers were strong on the kind of like actual metrics, but then more mediocre on the PFF grade. And the way I was able to explain that to myself was, well, they've actually had a pretty soft schedule. You don't. You're basically saying they're not adjusting to the quality of opponent enough.
I mean, the way that they're grading things, or they're reviewing each play, they're watching the film, and they're assigning a grade to every player and then to the team on each play. And so the context definitely matters there. Like you certainly can be adjusting for the opponent, but like if you're looking at like was this team, were the Eagles successful on this down at defending the pass? And like you're going to have a higher success rate at defending the pass against Daniel Jones and Deshaun Watson and Derek Carr when the Saints refuse to pass the ball, And then the thing for me is like when you've played there's one quarterback here that they've played, really, I guess two quarterbacks they've played that have been like competent to good so far this season. And that was Jordan Love and Baker Mayfield. And in those games, the Eagles are giving up an average of over 30 points. So I just think they might be a little bit more mortal than the PFF numbers say. But I think the game script stuff and them willing to just keep the ball on the ground is enough to kind of, make me a little hesitant to really attack this game.
That makes sense. A lot of these other teams are also going pretty run heavy against the Eagles, so they are a run funnel too. Like, so to me, that's a little bit more evidence, apart from the PFF grade, that their passing defense is good.
Yeah, I mean, some of these teams, like the Saints, the Saints kind of seem like they're closing their eyes and saying, no, you can't tell me not to run the ball, and they're just running the ball, right? And then Falcons, again, that was the Kirk Cousins kid gloves game. The Bucs, I'd be interested to see the Bucs.
Was that week 6?
That was week 4 was Bucs.
Week 4. Oh, okay. Well, that was the one team that actually did pass a lot against them.
Because then the other ones are the Browns. Okay. Yeah. Like, and then the Giants. Right. And then the Giants were getting the shit kicked out of them so bad that the fourth quarter was entirely all garbage time. So, but yeah, I really think that the Eagles run game is the thing that really sours me on this one. Not that it's an unplayable game, but just, I wanted to be excited about Burrow, but yeah, I think that's helpful context.
Yeah, that's fair. It's their opponents have been weak, and they did get torn up by the Bucs as well. So that's pretty fair. So I mean, if the Bucs can do it, then so can the Bengals.
Yeah. So I think it's reasonable. It's probably not an all systems go spot like I was initially thinking.
Right.
Just because of the running stuff. But I mean, you're really what it comes down to is like, can the Bengals get out to an early enough lead to where the Eagles really feel like they've got to keep their foot on the gas and pass? And if they do, I think my favorite way to play this game then is through AJ Brown. Because AJ Brown, if he were getting more volume, would be incredible. I mean, when we get to the wide receiver charts, I think you'll see what I'm talking about. But so yeah, I think I guess if I'm taking AJ,
but yeah, and Eagles lead kills this game.
Yeah, Eagles lead kills the game. So yeah, getting to play it through like AJ Brown with like a Bengals stack kind of seems interesting to me.
Yeah, that makes sense for sure. That is that doable in the Dawg Bowl? Just for I'm pretty sure it's tough to do.
Yeah,
in DraftKings.
Yeah, it's very doable. AJ Brown, you've got to take in the first round, but then you can pretty easily get T. Higgins in the second or third there, and then a lot of the quarterbacks are going really late, so you can get Burrow.
Okay.
There. Can't get Chase in there, but we'll talk about Chase versus Higgins later too. There's some interesting stuff there. We talked about the Bucs and how they really took it to the Eagles. We do need to talk about Baker Mayfield, who's looking like one of the better quarterbacks in the league and popping on our chart. Man, major downgrade for him. So Godwin, I would assume Godwin's probably done for the season. I haven't seen anything.
Yeah, he's done.
Yeah, they're saying indefinitely, but I'm assuming that's done for the season. Mike Evans, the most recent news I've seen is that he's gone through week 11, which seems not good. The Bucs,
I mean, he's an older receiver who had an aggravation of an existing hamstring strain. That's bad context. That is bad context for a recovery there. And who knows?
And not to read too much into his reaction on the field, but the hamstring, the pain from the injury was bad enough that it made him drop a touchdown he had already caught, and then also he writhed on the ground afterwards. So it didn't look like a fun injury. Definitely
not a grade 1. It's a grade 2 at least.
Yeah, feel bad for Mike Evans. I mean, the fact that he was out there playing through. I'm sure that if you or I had that hamstring injury, we'd be unable to get out of bed. Can't tie our shoes. And Mike Evans is out there running routes and cooking DBs, scoring touchdowns right up until the thing just explodes on him. So, all right, that's enough for the Baker downgrade. Just needed to mention that. Okay, this is an interesting spot this week that I think another quarterback that has already played the Eagles and coincidentally is right next to Baker on the chart. That's Jordan Love. I mean, this is kind of the area of the chart, like guys with high expected fantasy points from passing, but aren't like super high up there in adjusted yards per attempt, right around like the average. This is where I really think we can target players for like a big positive regression spot because they're under the radar enough. They haven't been like exploding, but they also have like the usage required to put up good weeks. And Jordan Love is, a downfield passer. He's aggressive. The problem with the Packers is how do you know who to stack him with? That's the difficult part.
Yeah. The other thing is they are with Jordan Love and they are a kind of like PRE pass rate over expected neutral team. And so if they get a big lead, then if they follow that trend, then a game script that asks them to run the ball, they will run the ball. Yeah. So you need either him to get there before that happens, or the question is can the Jaguars push the Packers.
Yeah, and the total is pretty high. I mean, it's the highest total on the slate, and it's got a good bit of margin.
So Vegas thinks the Jaguars can push the Packers. That's what that's saying.
But having watched the Jaguars, I don't know that I believe that.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, really, here's the crazy thing. This game is just going to be extremely volatile because both of these passers have deep ADOTs. I kind of like the Trevor Lawrence side of it too, because I feel like you're a little bit more insulated in that the Jaguars are probably going to have to pass because I don't really see them getting a big lead over the Packers and being able to control the ball or control the game through the run game. So I kind of like Lawrence. I think he's a little interesting here, and he's just going to be super volatile, right? If he's connecting on these deep shots, then it's going to be good, and if not, then whatever, you're going to lose anyway. So what are your thoughts on Lawrence here?
So just I'm gonna look up his DraftKings salary. So his DraftKings salary $5,600. We like that. And if you look at the spread on that game, it's only 4.5. So Vegas is saying that, hey, this isn't going to be some kind of blowout, so they're going to have to keep pace.
So hang on, Lawrence is 5,600, and I think you said Bo Nix is 5,600.
Yeah, they're the same price.
Oh my God! I mean, wow. Seems like a punt QB kind of week then, because I think those are both viable options.
Drake Maye is 5,500. Yeah,
I would be really excited for Drake Maye, just because I want to hammer this before everyone catches on. I think maybe you get a little bit of Drake Maye flying under the radar just because, number one, he's on the Patriots. Number two, his second game was the Island game in London, and so it's early. Maybe not everyone's watching that game. So I think there's still a little bit of time left before everyone's on to Drake Maye. But I mean, he's been very friendly for fantasy. The problem is it's against the Jets, and the Jets just play so painfully slow. I'm concerned that they might not even be able to put up points against the Patriots. So you might end up with the Patriots and Jets just willing to run the ball back and forth into each other as they settle for a bunch of goals or something.
I honestly think there's going to be risk to playing Drake Maye every week, just because the team stinks. As good as he has played or for fantasy, the team stinks. So that's always going to be tough. But it is interesting that you have all of these kind of punt options that are looking pretty playable, and I guess that kind of probably sets it up for a true punt week in the Dawg Bowl as well. If you have a lot of these players that are kind of like Bo Nix is probably undrafted.
There's Trevor Lawrence is undrafted. Tua is mostly undrafted. You get a lot of guys. I mean, there's no buys this week, correct?
I think last week was the week with the no buy.
No. Last week had a bunch of buys.
You're right. This week is the week with no buys.
Yeah. So I think this is so. There's a couple dynamics with the draft style weekly and daily games that are very different than salary cap games. When you get the bye weeks, the heavy bye weeks especially, a big part of the edge comes from knowing of all of these gross options that you end up having to fill out the back of your lineups with. Who are the best gross options. The scrolling down stuff becomes less potent in those bye weeks, not because you still want to find guys that are going undrafted in every draft, like that's still valuable. It's just that you wind up with everyone has bad players as their last player. You just end up with
right. So thinking about it, if you have let's say you have a week with 6 teams on bye. You have the Thursday night game, the Sunday night game, and sometimes there's 2 Monday night games. So that's what? That's 1, 2,
Well, then you
4.
get the London game too. So like you get what?
11.
Yeah.
So that's 17 teams out of 32 out of the pool. So you're down to 15 potential quarterbacks. So only 3 go actually undrafted every draft. And so you're actually having to like prioritize which last QB do you want. Whereas this, there's no, so it's probably closer to 20 actual quarterbacks. And so you really have kind of options galore there.
So the tricky thing is basically that it's kind of like a barbell type situation where some of the elite QBs, the ones that'll project extremely well, will be in the optimal lineup at a rate that they cannot be drafted at because it'll be higher than. Now this is in the 12 mans, not the 6 mans where you can get up to 16% of a player. That the 6 mans don't have this dynamic quite as much, but the 12 mans, like, you can end up with a quarterback who's going to be optimal so frequently that you should just slam them even if they're expensive because they are optimal 12% of the time and they can't be drafted more than 8 1/3% of the time, right? And then when you get to the other end of the spectrum, you're going to end up with a bunch of quarterbacks that are optimal like 4%, 5%, 3% of the time, right? But then you end up with some of those only being drafted 1% of the time or 2% of the time compared to the people that are drafted, 5, 6, 8% of the time. And so these slates with a lot of teams on them, the scrolling down, I think, there are lots of really good flex options and tight end punt options as well. But I do like getting the quarterback scroll down options there, especially if you're pairing a low drafted quarterback. Like here's a disgusting one. Say that you take Trevor Lawrence and Christian Kirk. That combination might exist 50 times in the Dawg Bowl, maybe 50 times. Less than 1%. Like for certain. Christian Kirk and Trevor Lawrence will exist less than 1% in the Dawg Bowl this week, even after I'm talking about it right here, because you have to scroll so far for Christian Kirk and Trevor Lawrence is going undrafted. So like, I don't love that one because I would rather play it through Brian Thomas, but like if you can find one like that where you're getting a quarterback that goes undrafted with a flex option that goes relatively undrafted and you're not giving up too much, that's probably one of the better ways to get a big edge this week.
That's great, helpful information.
Here's another guy that I'm interested in just because we finally saw a change for him. And so this was a quarterback that everyone was super excited about heading into the season because he's been elite for his entire career. He's been one of the best fantasy quarterbacks. That's Josh Allen. But this season, prior to last week, he had never had over 30 attempts this season. Like the attempts were just so low that it was really, really hurting his overall fantasy production. You're just getting floor outcomes much lower than what we've seen even be possible historically for Josh Allen. And that really changes the profile. So much of Josh Allen's appeal was his floor was so high and so safe. Like you had such a consistently high floor.
But this week was different, right?
This week was different. They passed a lot. They had, I believe, it was obviously their season high attempts. I believe they got up to 33 this week,
and it was plus 10% over expected. So it wasn't. I initially wondered if it was because they were down against the Titans, but that is not the case. They actually passed above their expectation, and to me, such a drastic change. And it's not like that's such a drastic change, and it's not like the Titans are pass funnel. Like it's not like that's a game plan that you go in for this specific opponent. That does make me wonder that after a couple of rough outings, if they've actually gone back and said, no, we're not doing the run thing anymore. We're trading for Amari Cooper, and we're opening things up. Obviously we need more than a week, but in kind of short sample stuff, I think that's a pretty in the idea where you need to play it before you see it. I think that's kind of compelling, actually.
Yeah, as I think through it, the Titans have a pretty strong run defense, and James Cook was active in this game, allegedly fully healthy off the toe. He did miss the previous week, so he's probably not 100%, but he was good to go. So maybe that was enough for them to go away from the run a little bit, and then you factor in the Amari Cooper stuff that they want to,
Ray Davis was great though in his absence.
Yeah, Ray Davis was good, but then Ray Davis was also banged up this week too. So
okay,
you have Ray Davis true questionable. He was like potentially going to miss, and then you have Cook off of the injury. I'm wondering if their running backs weren't full strength, and that's part of the reason. The other reason why I'm like hesitant to say, oh yeah, the Bills like figured it out. The Bills are paying attention and self-scouting and realizing like we cannot keep doing this if we want to be a competitive NFL team. The reason I'm hesitant to do that is you have to be so fucking stupid to get to this point and run the way that they're running that I think they might be too stupid to do that and realize like we probably should pass a little more. Now the Amari Cooper trade is decent evidence that like maybe they did want to pass a little more. I'm just like, how did you get here? But how did it take this long? So I'm worried that I might be wish casting here and being like, oh, finally I can play the Bills again. The Bills are going to pass. Josh Allen is back for fantasy.
Right. It's not the biggest. You need to see it with just a 1 week. You can explain it away. With it just being 1 week, you can explain it away. But I think it's something to pay attention to.
It's definitely something to pay attention to. The thing that's hard for me is like, if I was getting a big discount on Josh Allen, I'd be willing to do the play it before you see it thing.
Okay. Yeah. That makes sense. Where you're actually in the context of still paying old Josh Allen price, then the chance of getting old Josh Allen, it doesn't make sense to pay full price for just a chance.
Yeah, let me look at where he's been going. Let's see here.
And you're still paying old Josh Allen price on DraftKings as well.
Yeah, so let's see.
And so maybe honestly, maybe this isn't actionable information.
So yeah, he goes. He went at pick 17 in this Dawg Bowl. What about this one? Went at pick 14.
And where's that relative to Lamar?
Let's see. Lamar went pick 15 and
okay. So yeah, maybe we don't need to focus too much on this for the quarterback part, because I don't think this is actionable. Like if you have him on your team in redraft, you're starting him,
right?
But I guess the more important context to what I was saying of like playing it before you see it, you still have to pay the old price. You should not pay the old price to get the chance of it.
But we're willing to adjust our priors here. If I see it again, if I see the Bills come out and they're passing, they've got a positive PROE again, I'm ready to adjust quickly, right? Because
it's interesting signal.
Yeah, two events that are like drastically different than what we've seen so far in the season. To me is like a big enough deviation to where it's like, okay, this is probably serious. Now, the reason I was so interested in it too is they get the Seahawks, who are just like, oh, they're a dream fantasy matchup because they're going to play fast, they're going to pass the ball. Their defense hasn't been spectacular. So, I mean, I know they got a lot of turnover, or they generated some turnovers this week, but yeah, I really wanted to be able to play Josh Allen this week. I'm worried that I don't think the market's going to let me in draft style formats, and I assume it's expensive in salary cap as well. But we
unless you get like if you got like 2% ownership Josh Allen, then that's the situation. But it's Tuesday. We don't have that.
Yeah. Okay, moving on. All right, we need to talk about Russell Wilson. He's on the chart. He's here in the upper right-hand quadrant of the chart. And I've seen a lot of discourse about how Russ was so much better for the offense than Justin Fields, and he's like clearly the better quarterback and the better passer. And I mean, I've intentionally not engaged with it because I feel like if you actually watch that game and that's how you feel, you're probably not like a very logical or reasonable observer. But it's been a really, I'm viewing it as a huge positive because it's allowing me to make mental notes on people as unserious analysts. So like if someone is out here telling me like Russell Wilson was a good quarterback, he looked so good, like I immediately know that I never have to listen to anything you say again because you're just not being genuine with your analysis, or like you're not watching the game, or there's something wrong in your process to where you're telling me something that's just so clearly inaccurate that I can immediately be marked safe from all of your future shitty analysis. But that was my Russell Wilson rant. Curious on your thoughts on his performance.
So, I mean, the way he got there this week was kind of chucking it deep to Pickens. And Pickens made those plays. I think that's kind of been the Pickens role for most of the year. They've kind of phased him in and out. Like they had that weird game where they only played him on 65% of routes, but it's kind of been his role where he's like the person that they throw deep to. His targets per run has actually been pretty strong, and his ADOT has been good. So that like I guess that's Pickens' role, and to me, that's more about the spikiness of that kind of role where when you connect on the deep shots, you look fantastic. And then the Steelers, they had the lead, and so it's not like they had to pass a ton. They did have 31 dropbacks, but nothing crazy. And then but the QB is going to be in control there when you have that lead. But I know that I do remember when we talked about it that there was two passes that were pretty close to interceptions or 50-50 be interceptions. And so when you're looking at this kind of sample size of like a 30 dropbacks, I think it's like 28 attempts or something like that. You like it's stuff like that makes you have to think, okay, this is a very small sample size, so you can't get too carried away with the insane efficiency. It is pretty insane efficiency. I didn't watch the game as closely as you did, so maybe mark me as somebody who not a non-ball nor a non-ball watcher, but I think that a lot of it is the spikiness of Pickens and that connected, and you had the team in control for a lot of the game, and then where games where those miss, and then the Steelers are behind, I think that's a much tougher context and much tougher environment for that to work. That's kind of what I think. And I guess it's more helpful it's a little bit more helpful for the weapons that slightly more attempts will turn into dropbacks. I actually don't think that the difference is going to be that meaningful. Like Fields' attempts to drop back rate has actually been high enough this year, and then Russell Wilson is also somebody who's struggled with sacks his entire career. So, yeah, that's kind of my overall takeaway on this stuff.
Yeah, I think that's pretty well put. I mean, George Pickens looked like one of the very best receivers in the NFL during that game. I mean, he was go ahead. Sorry.
He
was absolutely mossing defenders. Like, and so the two plays that I'm thinking of where they're absolute prayer balls, like they're poorly thrown, they're underthrown by a good bit. George Pickens is coming back and leaping over a defender, making acrobatic catches to get these. Let's just call them 50-50 balls, because that's what they were. I would not be surprised if the defender had a higher probability of catching the ball than Pickens on at least one of those. But let's just take those two, which I believe were like roughly 40-yard completions for each of those. So you get those. If those go the other way, you're looking at an 80-yard swing just on losing the completions. And then if we're adjusting this adjusted yards per attempt formula and saying like, oh, actually in another just as plausible outcome, he throws 2 interceptions instead of those 2 completions. Well, interceptions are worth minus 45 yards in the adjusted yards per attempt formula. So we're talking about Russell Wilson losing 170 yards. And when you've got how many attempts did he have? Just under 30, right?
29 attempts.
So you're talking about Russell Wilson losing approximately 6 yards in adjusted yards per attempt. So he'd be down at right about 4, aka the very worst quarterback in the league. If George Pickens is not George Pickens, if that was Van Jefferson down there instead, Russell Wilson is below Will Levis by like a country mile right now. So,
but I guess the other way to look at it is those wouldn't be picks 100% of the time,
right?
Either. But that's just more kind of the spikiness of this range when you're looking at this low sample. My actual first reaction, like I was trying to play devil's advocate with myself, was, well, these are just Russell Wilson moon balls. Maybe they're not as accurate as we'd like, but what if Pickens just catches? What if Pickens makes the acrobatic catches on the moon balls, and like that's kind of what happens for the next couple of games? Like, we hate it. It looks bad for us, but he just gets that bailout from Pickens.
Yeah, I don't think that's outside the realm of possibilities. I also don't think that it's very different than having Fields in there throwing moon balls to, like. Right.
No, I don't think this game is a sign that Russ is good. It's just more, he could put up another big day, but I think the point is this is the higher end. If you're looking at volatile outcomes, this is the higher end of it, and you're looking at the high end right now. There's probable heavy regression coming.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, speaking of a guy with some heavy regression coming, Brock Purdy. Just his weapons are dropping like flies. Brandon Aiyuk, terrible ACL injury. Deebo Samuel, bad case of pneumonia, hospitalized. George Kittle has a foot injury he's dealing with, and he's been peppered on the injury report pretty much every week so far through the season. He's gutting it out because that guy's a Viking warrior. But, man, now here's the funny thing. Purdy, while he was bad for real-life football, actually put up a reasonable fantasy day without all his guys. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on Purdy here going forward in the depleted 49ers?
Yeah, obviously losing the good receivers hurts a lot. I do think that and I remember saying this last week, that the Chiefs was a bad matchup for him because their pass rush is so good. The 49ers still do have a strong, like a good to strong offensive line, overmatched by the Chiefs, but won't be in most games. And so I can see the time that they buy him, meaning and combined with the Shanahan scheme, meaning that you still get pretty good production. It won't be the top end that we've been kind of used to with all those weapons. But I can still see it being pretty good.
Yeah, I would still expect. I don't think his expected fantasy points are going to change all that much. I don't see when Christian McCaffrey comes back, maybe they're willing to run the ball a little more heavily, and you see his expected fantasy points go down a tiny bit. But the 49ers always want to run the ball, so I just expect his adjusted yards per attempt to go down a little bit. But I still think he's fine for fantasy. He's just, you're
not going to get the Deebo. Well, until Deebo comes back, you're not going to get the Deebo catches a slant, like powers through 3 guys and then houses it.
Right.
But they give him so much time that he probably will find a way to make it work with these other guys.
Yeah. All right. I've got one last question on the quarterback chart here before we move on. Pat Mahomes has had a really, really poor start to this fantasy season. He's crushing in the QB wins statistic, but we unfortunately do not get fantasy points for that. So I want to just rapid fire ask you some quarterbacks.
Yeah, I have a more kind of general. I'm sorry to. My more general point about Mahomes is, I think the way you have to look at him is a low efficiency pocket passer. You do get some rushing, you do get a little bit of rushing, so maybe that's a bit unfair, but it's not a huge amount. And I know you had the rushing touchdown this week, but that's not kind of the typical.
Yeah. In points per alpha plays, Mahomes is also crushing, because that rushing touchdown this week was so sick, where he just absolutely trucks a 49ers defender and stands over him. Man, that was a big alpha energy. Yeah,
for sure. But I think that's the way you kind of have to look at him, where he's not. I haven't looked at projections actually at all this year, but I don't think I don't see how you can project Mahomes for a good amount of points.
No, yeah, he's I'd consider him basically unplayable, like on a Dawg Bowl slate. Here's some quarterbacks I want to know if you would start these guys over Mahomes in Week 8. We'll just quick yes no. Geno Smith.
I think so.
Joe Burrow.
Yeah.
Dak Prescott.
That one's closer to 50-50.
Bo Nix.
Another one where it's pretty close to 50-50.
Drake Maye.
I think I'd probably start Maye.
Russell Wilson.
Yeah, you have to start Mahomes over. Shoot me if I would start Russell Wilson over Mahomes.
Man, but how the mighty have fallen. I personally will be starting Drake Maye over Pat Mahomes on in a FFPC Fantasy Pros League for the second week in a row. I did it this last week as well and felt great about it. All right, we can move on to the running back charts now, unless you have anyone else on the quarterback chart you wanted to talk about.
No. So we've got the running back snaps and usage chart here. We've got everything here is at a percentage of the team's total plays. So of those plays, which were rush attempts, which were routes for that receivers, which were pass blocking, because we do want to see who's trusted with the pass blocking, and then just to round it out, so you see their full snap share is run blocking. And I see you're just to keep us rolling here. Your first note on the usage chart was Breece all the way back. One thing I kind of noticed about Breece is that his snap share was pretty high this week. Let me look up I should have been ready with the exact number, but it was much higher than previous weeks. And I do wonder if that's because the Jets were chasing the game and he's their kind of like primary passing down back. But he also played great, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was high the last 2 weeks. It's really just been since the head coaching change, the offensive coordinator change. But yeah, I mean, really here's the problem with Breece is their offensive line stinks, and so you're losing.
You're right. It's high the last 2 weeks since the offensive coach change, which that's a big difference.
You're losing a ton of the value that he could be giving you in the running game just because of how poor their offensive line is. So that's troubling. The good news is he's such an incredible pass catcher. Number one, he is very legitimately great at actually catching the ball, running routes, like operating as a receiver. I think probably McCaffrey is like a better route runner. Like if these guys had to line up at receiver the entire game, McCaffrey probably edges Hall out. But like the fact that that's a conversation I think is pretty telling as to how incredibly talented Breece is as a pass catcher. The real thing, though, is just Breece in space. Like, if you have Breece in space, it's a big problem for the defense. Like, every time that he got the ball in space this last game, it was pretty much like 10 yards guaranteed. Like, he gets the ball on a little check down, and there's no one within 5 yards of him. Well, it doesn't matter if the first guy is going to close on him and meet him, 5 yards after the catch, because he's going to juke that guy or he's going to break his tackle. I mean, he looks so good. He is incredible. There have been a couple plays now. It's these last 2 weeks too, where it's like, oh my God, he's gonna break a big touchdown run, and like twice he hasn't converted on them. And I'm hesitant to say like, oh, he lost a little of his top end speed. Like, I don't really think that's it.
He's too young for that to be the case.
Yeah, there was the one play 2 weeks ago now where it did just look a little weird. I mean, I don't want to overly zoom in on the result of one specific play. What it looked like was he like gives up at the end, like he can't beat the safety. What I want to tell myself, the copium, is I think he thought he was setting the guy up for like a juke where he's like, I
think he probably didn't see the guy until it was too late.
Yeah, that could be it as well. But I don't want to read too much into that.
Yeah. One thing just to keep us rolling, that so Breece Hall, incredible. The other thing, though, with his increased role, last week, Braylon Allen saw only 5 snaps.
Yeah,
so
Braylon Allen is just...
He went from a very startable player to just pure contingent upside, like you said.
Huge contingent upside. He's still worth a stat. Like, if you're in a redraft league, FFPC, main event, like, Braylon Allen's an awesome guy to have on the back end of your roster, because if anything happens to Breece, he's probably a league winner. But we're done waxing poetic on Breece Hall. I've got a guy who he didn't play this week, so nothing really changing with his snaps and usage, although we are using the 4-week rolling data on these charts just to try and pick up on trends as they're happening, so we're not using the entire season. So we are dropping off a less favorable game for this player in exchange for his last 3 games, because he didn't play in week 7. We're all pretty favorable. That's DeAndre Swift. He's up here near the top of the chart as far as usage. I'm curious, do you think that Swift is going to maintain this level of a role here going forward? And
I think what he's at risk of losing is the goal line stuff. If you're considering the kind of narrative that going into the bye week, they self-scout and then they look at the tape and they're like, okay, this is where we're going to change. Where you would do that for the Bears on Swift is, okay, this guy is great between the 20s, kind of has been has been like very at least serviceable between the 20s entire career, but pretty rough on the goal line. And I think that's where you could see Rojo become the goal line back. I think that's your big concern there for DeAndre Swift. But I think other than that that's more of a risk than like a base case. I think he's looking. I don't see a reason why they would go away from him. Like he went into the bye playing strong, playing well.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good thing to look out for, though. If he does start losing the goal line role, it's definitely something to be wary of. They do get the Commanders this week. I'm kind of wondering how exciting the Commanders will be if Jaden Daniels misses against a good Bears defense. This game is one where I'm kind of excited about it, but at the same time, I can really see how it fails where the Bears decide to go run heavy and keep the ball in Swift's hands, and the Commanders are really don't want to open it up with Mariota, and they just run the ball a ton with Brian Robinson against a pretty strong...
Oh, it's going to be the Cliff Kingsbury show where it's running the ball and short passes.
Yeah,
that's what it's going to be.
I tend to agree. Another guy...
And they had a -7% PROE last week, which kind of bears that out.
Yeah. Another guy whose role I think is this guy's role I think might be in even more jeopardy than Swift but it's definitely one that's ambiguous still as well, is James Cook. I mean, really, the Ray Davis questionable was the best thing to happen to James Cook, because I think if Ray Davis strung together another game as strong as the first one, where he really got the workload, I think you were going to see James Cook's role begin to dwindle. Not that he would lose the primary job, but just that they'd be more willing to work.
He only had 50% of the snaps in week 7. So I do
think part of that is
that's your only cope. Like, that's a potential reason. It's a potential reason that James Cook was banged up with a toe injury, that he only played 50% of snaps, and that next week he's going to be perfectly fine. It's also potential that he actually was close to go. He was close to going on Monday, and then by the time Sunday came around, he was kind of fine. That's one of those things we actually don't know what the explanation is. We just know that a snap count went down dramatically. It might have been the injury, but his snap count was down a lot. And I think the other thing to remember with the Bills is the running backs only have true value if they're running a lot. Like, if they go to a high drop back count again, like, and you get this kind of committee backfield, which seems very much in play, like, I don't think any of these guys are startable unless you get a spot start from contingent upside.
So are you saying that Josh Allen and James Cook are a real Harry Potter and Lord Voldemort scenario where one must die for the other to live?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. Next running back I had a note on, Kareem Hunt. I mean, people thought, maybe they're going to really split up this Isaiah Pacheco work. Nope. Kareem Hunt's getting it all. It is the Kareem Hunt show. I mean, stop me if this is too hyperbolic, Drico, but does Kareem Hunt have the safest floor in fantasy? Because the Chiefs are a run-first team at this point.
Week to week, I think that's right. Week to week. Like,
yeah.
He's older. We've seen him like kind of fade, so I have personally I have questions as to how long he can maintain a workload at like a high like quality. But week to week, I think that's right. I think he has great projectable volume. He's playing just fine. He's not shitting the bed or anything like that. So no risk of getting benched. Seems unlikely that he's just going to shit the bed. Unless you get some kind of because he's older, so he could pick up some kind of knock more easily than other players that could linger more. But I think that's I have that concern just because he's somebody who went from return. But I think you're right. It is a very safe, projectable volume role.
Yeah, I mean, Gretsch wrote about it in Signals and just said, Kareem Hunt just keeps falling forward. That he does. Like, that's the runs aren't like particularly impressive or anything. You know what it reminds me of is it's like almost washed but not quite washed yet. Ezekiel Elliott, like when he was just like had the really good success rate but like no more explosive plays, and he was like still getting double-digit touchdowns. Getting goal line carries for the Cowboys. This is Kareem Hunt is in his almost washed Ezekiel Elliott era right now.
But the thing about that era for Zeke is that by the end of the season, he wasn't playable for fantasy.
Right.
He opened the gate playable, very playable, and put up decent weeks. But by the end, it was like, oh, this guy is so hurt that like we're gonna keep playing him. He's a team player, but he wasn't getting there for fantasy.
The thing I think that's really good analysis, because I think you're right that it's more likely than not that Kareem Hunt wanes as the season goes on.
Right.
The thing that makes that interesting is that the Chiefs are a good enough team and a team that is well run to where they'll figure if that's happening, they will figure out an alternative. And so I'm really excited as to like maybe the Chiefs actually have to start scheming some stuff to Xavier Worthy by the end of the season. To maybe the offense has to get a little bit more gadgety, or maybe they're having to open it up
They
and do
did
more deep
actually
shots.
scheme stuff. I know we're not on the receiver chart, but they did actually scheme stuff to Worthy.
Yeah, and then they did have the they had some Mecole Hardman stuff as well. So yeah, I think we could see that part of the offense expand as the season goes on. But okay, here's another running back that I definitely think we need to talk about. Javonte Williams finally has his first big game, right? I mean, the role is extraordinarily consistent. It's just another week of, hey, Javonte is going to be the lead back. We're going to use him up to a certain a count of raw snaps. That's really how they divide the work. It's not a percentage thing. So if you're looking week over week, that's going to fluctuate just due to the overall play volume. But in weeks where they have really low play volume, Javonte's going to have a huge percentage of the workload. In weeks where they have really high play volume, he'll have a slightly lower percentage of the workload. But he looks like, I mean, he's the running back one on the team right now.
Yeah, so they played 68 offensive snaps last week, and he was on the field for 59% or 40 of those snaps. So he's looking pretty solid. And I think he hasn't played the best, but then every time they try to like give somebody else a look, that other player just like shits the bed. Yeah, and so that's probably still an ongoing risk of like they give somebody else a look and they actually look good, and they're like, uh-oh. But that's not happening, and while that's not happening, I think you're getting a good role for Javonte.
Yeah, the talent moat is not particularly deep or wide. However, the people trying to swim across the talent moat cannot swim. They're drowning in the talent moat. I mean, Estime puts the ball on the ground again. You got to think that the Audric Estime experiment might end before it even starts if he fumbles again.
Right.
And then Jaleel McLaughlin is like, he's fun, but he's never going to get enough snaps. The thing is, the Broncos would have to run so many plays for Jaleel McLaughlin to have the snaps, but like
they ran nearly 70 plays and he only got 11 snaps.
Right. But let me read you the Javonte snap count week over week, just so you can see what I'm talking about. And this is a shout out to Gretsch for initially pointing this out, but it's something that I paid attention to after he called it out. But here's the Javonte snaps, just raw snaps, not percentage, week over week. 36, 40, 35, 35, 38, 38, 41. It like Sean Payton has a number of snaps that he thinks is like the limit where he wants to begin tapering off the workload on a guy, and that's what he's going by. And so knowing that, we kind of know a couple things. Number one, Javonte's role is going, like, he's got a floor even in these low play volume games because he'll just be the guy that gets it all then. And then number two, ceiling's a little capped in these highest play volume games because he'll start losing some of those snaps. So he's kind of like a ho-hum, like if you're getting him at a good value, he's great to play, but he's never someone that I really want to pay up a ton for. So this week is super interesting against the Panthers. What I think is going to happen to him in like Dawg Bowl ADP is he'll climb a bunch because projections are going to project pretty well with good projectable volume and a really strong matchup. And after he climbs, I think he'll be an absolute dog shit pick because I think the ceiling is capped. You're going to take a player that is screaming up and then going next to players with ceilings that are less capped. And also the talent has not been great this season. But I'm loving him right now. But I bet you by Thursday, I probably will have drafted my last Javonte Williams share for the week.
So let me tell you why Javonte Williams isn't going anywhere. Of the 49 pass blocking snaps for Broncos running backs, he has 44 of those.
Yeah, it kind of seems like he's the only guy they trust there.
So that is a pretty secure game script proof role.
Yeah, I'm pulling up Jaleel McLaughlin here. Now, there were some of these games where they had more snaps. He did more play volume. He did play a little bit more. But yeah, like the highest number of snaps he's had all season was back in week 1 where he got 24. He's never had more snaps than that. So yeah, it's tough to see Jaleel get there. Maybe like the spot for Jaleel is full PPR best ball formats only, because you're never going to play this guy, and you really need the additional little PPR scam that you get from him. And he'll sneak a touchdown in there with a cool play here and there, but it's never going to be anything you'll know when to start. So, all right, there's 2 more guys or situations really that I want to talk about on this chart before you go to the backups. But we can see the Zach Moss and Chase Brown flipping happening in real time here. Man, Zach Moss was really bad on the ground this week. I need you to confirm this because I'm just going off memory right here. But did he not have 6 carries for 7 yards this week? I believe that is the Zach Moss rushing line.
I know he had 6 attempts. I don't have his. I don't have. Let me pull. I can pull up his rushing.
Yeah, he looks bad as a rusher. There was one play where he gets a little dump off from Burrow, and I didn't see his number, and he like looked halfway decent at he had his first step was like, the guy has a little bit of burst, okay, and then like he went nowhere after like the first step looked fast. I was like, oh yes, Chase Brown, and then after that first step, I realized it was Zach Moss because he started moving like he was in mud.
Yeah, 7 yards.
Yeah. So the problem, I think, though, is as much as I want to be the full-fledged Chase
10 of those after contact.
Oh, man. I want to be the full-fledged Chase Brown slappy because he's clearly the better player, and the team is acknowledging that as well. The problem is they're still using Zach Moss, and I think Chase Brown is like the poor man's Devon Chan, where he's like, you're relying on the explosive play. He's not getting enough of the volume to really be like super consistent week to week. I mean, really, the spots where I want to play Chase Brown are probably more spots where I just want to like onslaught the Bengals. And I'm saying the Bengals are scoring 4 touchdowns today. And so Chase Brown can get one of them. But he's not super appealing to me as like
No, he's not.
Just yet. So anyway, that's the cold water on Chase Brown. But
he's got 45% of like fantasy useful snaps. So combining rush attempts and routes versus 32% for Moss. So I think you've had the flippings happened. It's occurred, but what keeps Zach Moss on the field as bad as he looks is the pass blocking. Like they think Chase Brown is a better rusher. 28% versus 11% for Zach Moss last week. But they trust Zach Moss in the pass blocking more. So I think that's what keeps him like kind of hanging around.
Yeah, and I unfortunately do not think that's going to go away.
No, it's not.
That's the problem. Really what you need for Chase Brown, and this is so weird that you're like, oh, you need a Zach Moss injury so he can stop pass blocking. But really, the reason you need that is just so Chase Brown can be on the field more. And like, I bet you that if they did not have Zach Moss, they simply would choose to have a different player block. They'd be like, well, we did want to have the back stay in and block. Instead, we're just going to have an extra tight end out here now.
Right. Eric All, you're blocking instead of that 2 yard screenplay. You're blocking now.
Yep. I 100% think that is the way that it would go if Zach Moss were unavailable. All right, last guy or situation on the starters chart. But man, Tyrone Tracy retains a really strong role with Singletary back. I wanted to ask you, do you think that's simply because Singletary wasn't at 100%, or has Tracy earned this large of a role going forward?
It's hard for me to consider like Singletary just being iced out. Like Singletary is the icer. He's not the ice E. And like we have to pay attention. If we get another week like that, then like it almost doesn't matter if it's just because he's still injured. Like they're still playing him more.
Right.
It's a legitimate. It's a hard call. I don't have a way to like tell. I'm a little suspicious of that being the case. Like they're like, oh yeah, great stuff, Devin Singletary. We gave you the free agent contract. You're our favorite player, but we don't want to play you anymore. Like that seems a little far fetched to me. But that other than that kind of gut feeling, I don't have a lot to base it on.
Yeah, for reference, 12 snaps for Devin Singletary to 39 for Tyrone Tracy. Here's a fun stat. Here's a interesting. You can show how in the weeds you are looking at Giants running back snaps by position. Tyrone Tracy lined up as a receiver on the same number of snaps that Devin Singletary was on the field at all. 12 snaps either in the slot or out wide for Tyrone Tracy, 12 total snaps for Devin Singletary.
Wow, that is pretty interesting.
Yeah.
So I wonder how much overlap that was, where like we're bringing Devin Singletary on, but we're not taking Tyrone Tracy off. No, you stay on, but we still want you to play receiver. All right, that is pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I don't have a ton of Tracy. I definitely was drafting Tracy, but like I don't have like 20% or anything. And so the reason I'm telling you this context is I don't want you to think that I'm some like Tyrone Tracy bag defending slappy. I think Tyrone Tracy's just good. Like I think
he is.
He's
like,
just good.
Like even when Singletary's back, they still have to find a way to get Tracy involved. But
yeah.
I don't know if like it's so hard for me to think of, like that's such an alien thing.
All right, let's go to the backups chart. One of the running backs we're about to talk about is actually at the very bottom of the starters chart, and that's Rachaad White. But we need to talk about him in the context of Bucky Irving and Sean Tucker. Now, I'm trying to remember because I watched this entire game last night. I'm trying to remember. I'm pretty confident both of the White touchdowns came after the game was pretty out of hand. Am I right about that?
I know there was the really late one.
The really late one was just like pure garbage time. Like no one was playing defense. It was a blown coverage. He gets to walk into.
I think the first one, the game was like even not. I think it was still like a competitive. Like, and I'm being generous by competitive. Like, there was still some chance that the Bucs could win.
I think that's right.
So the way I'm kind of looking at it is, if you just look at the rush attempts, so White did lead in rush attempts. He had 12% versus 11% for Bucky Irving, 6% for Sean Tucker, and actually like 10 rush attempts, 9 rush attempts, 5 rush attempts for Tucker, and then he had 22 routes versus 18 for Bucky, 8 for Sean Tucker. So like that's a true like committee. And then even being the lead, White is only on the field for 46%. His snap rate is 46%. So I think at least in that game, he still had a pretty important role. But I do wonder if in games that where the game script is not so against them, where they are actually running the ball, if they involve Bucky and Sean Tucker more, because he does have that 6% pass blocking kind of moat where he's able to that's his calling card to stay on the field.
Yeah,
but I guess if this is, I think this is the upside. This is the best case scenario for Rachaad White snaps is close to 50%. and then it's like, what, 35-15 for the other guys? Like, as early as he drafted White, like, that's pretty rough. I don't know if any of these guys are startable now.
Yeah, it's going to be – so there's two things. Number one, it was pretty encouraging to me to see the Bucs be willing to adjust how they viewed their backfield after getting that information that –
Right, so quickly. They didn't just like, oh, yeah, great stuff, Tucker, but you're back on the bench now.
Yeah.
And they do the same with Bucky, where after he played well, they're like, okay, we have to play this guy more.
It just seems so criminal to me. Remember last year when they're trotting out like Chase Edmonds and shit and just like not giving Sean Tucker a chance? Like, how incompetent was that coaching staff last year to not – I mean, like, I know it's largely the same people, different offensive coordinator with Canales going over to Carolina, but what the fuck were you guys doing? Like, you had this guy here and you're like trying to figure out what to do, and he's like probably your best pure runner,
Right.
Also, Bucky looked like he could give looks like he'd give White a run for his money in the passing game. Bucky looks really elusive, man. Like he's
a great pass catcher. Yeah. And he got a lot of routes too. He got 22% of routes versus 27 for White. Yeah. So I mean, White is getting squeezed all over. But so in a game where they had 82 plays, you had 38 total snaps, so about half for White, and then 28 for Bucky, 16 for Tucker. So I'm maybe I'm just repeating myself here. I think that they like all of these guys now, but in a game where that's closer to 50 plays, I think it's very hard to get like good points from any of these guys reliably.
Yeah, I think that sums it up pretty.
Like if you're in a pinch, you can start White, but that certainly isn't what you drafted.
I mean, I'd be willing to bet that White never scores more fantasy points than his last game for the rest of this season.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Now, I'd be willing to put that bet out to the chat if anyone wants to actually give me action on it. But anyone that would actually place that bet already had their feelings hurt too bad by my Russell Wilson rant, and they've stopped listening.
Or if you're listening into the podcast, feel free to DM Sack in Discord afterwards.
Yeah. All right, I had just a couple quick notes. We can kind of fly through these ones. Jerome Ford is dead with Nick Chubb back. Nick Chubb getting like a lot of work in his first game. Ford not fantasy relevant anymore. Just pure handcuff. Okay, Dolphins running backs. I think this is you got to do that.
Strong was the RB1.
Yeah.
So I think I'm sorry to cut you off, but I think if they are going to be passing a lot, I think Pierre Strong is still kind of interesting there because unless they decide to ramp up Chubb as a pass catcher as well, and maybe they could, maybe like he dominated the rush attempts.
They gave him a couple targets. Let me find him here.
He had 11 routes.
Okay.
So it's not like they just didn't use him, but it'll be interesting to see how that evolves. But I did think that was interesting that Pierre Strong actually played a decent amount. Like it, obviously the Jerome Ford just iced, just surplus to requirements. But he still played a bit. So Ford had 2 targets versus 3 for Chubb. So maybe actually, maybe that probably those routes probably are in danger, and that's probably where an increased snap count will come for Chubb.
Yeah. All right, Dolphins running backs. I think you gotta this is the spot where you buy the dip. Is there anything left with Mostert? I liked him as a really sneaky dart throw last week against the Colts. The offense just was putrid. They tried to run, they just couldn't really get anything going. And then Mostert has the really costly fumble for them. So is there any point to playing Mostert anymore? Like, can he still have the big weeks? I guess for me, if he does, it's just simply on the back of scoring 1 million touchdowns like he did last year. Like, Dolphins are a productive offense again, and he gets some goal line carries. But we already saw them willing to give goal line touches to Chan. So can you play Mostert or not? And are you?
No, I don't think you can. Like, they played they played 3 running backs here. Chan was the lead, but so they had 72 plays overall, which is certainly a decent amount. And of those, Mostert was on the field for 22 of them. So that's not honestly, that's not bad. I think that's like, in a pinch, you can start that for sure in redraft. But in terms of like DFS, I think that's completely unplayable.
I got a couple questions for you on a Chan here. So here's some guys going after a Chan this week. They get the Cardinals. I want to know, are you taking a Chan over these guys, or is this a signal that his price might be a little too frothy? DeAndre Swift, a Chan or Swift?
I think you do want a Chan over Swift. Like, especially if you're telling me she was back. I think you do want that.
Josh Jacobs.
That seems close to 50-50 to me.
Javonte Williams.
You want a Chan over Javonte, I think.
Agree. J.K. Dobbins.
Yeah, I think you also want a Chan over Dobbins.
That one's close for me, just because you get the New Orleans matchup, and they're just feeding Dobbins. 17 opportunities last game, 27 opportunities the game before, 17 opportunities the game prior to that. That one's close for me. But okay, it sounds like you think that a Chan is reasonably priced, though.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously we haven't seen it this year, but he does have like that sixth gear upside of like, he gets in space and he breaks some huge plays. And I think that element is worth paying a little more for than the guys mentioned.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. All right, let's see here. I think we can just go to the efficiency charts now here.
Okay.
So I'll let you explain what we're looking at here.
Oh yeah, sorry. We've got receiving expected points on the vertical axis. We've got rushing expected points on the horizontal. And size of the bubble corresponds to fantasy points over expected. So bigger bubble means more positive efficiency. And I know your first kind of note was a couple of 2v2s of Josh Jacobs versus Javonte. And
they're right next to each other in the middle of the chart in that 10 to 15 expected fantasy point band. Similar efficiency too.
That is interesting. I think you want Jacobs because of the better offense.
I agree.
But it's that's not a conviction play. I think you can make the case for Javonte.
Yeah, I do think it's helpful to frame some of these running backs like that because everyone thinks Javonte is so gross, and I know a lot of people in our that kind of think of the game similarly to us would also think Jacobs is gross, but I just see so much stuff about how good Josh Jacobs is and how he's on such a good offense, and it's like, I mean, really, when you like Yeah, all that is being factored in here when you look at his expected fantasy points and his efficiency. It comes out right around Javonte Williams, who's also right next to our next guy, Bijan Robinson, who's also similar to them in expected fantasy points and efficiency. But I compared him to the other B Robinson in this little 1v1 of Brian Robinson. Who do you prefer this week? And of course, I think we got to take costs into consideration here because Bijan's going to be like a first round pick, and Brian Robinson goes much later than that. Who do you prefer this week, Bijan or Brian Robinson?
And who? I think you told me who do the Commanders play?
The Commanders get. Oh, I just had that. Sorry, my brain is. The Bears. The Bears.
The Bears. So tough offense. You're maybe without your starting quarterback. I mean, obviously, you strongly prefer Bijan, without Price. And then, what round does Brian Robinson go in?
I've seen him go as late as like the late 5th, early 6th round.
Okay, so he's basically free,
is
what you're telling me. And so Austin Eckler is back. He runs the passing routes, whereas Brian Robinson. So Brian Robinson, is there something I don't know here that Brian Robinson 18% rush? Sorry, I'll use numbers. Brian Robinson 12 rush attempts. Do you think the Jeremy McNichols is just a game script?
I think it's coming off the knee injury, and it was a game where they didn't need to use him because he missed a game with the knee injury. He was limited the game before, and they barely the game that he played with the knee injury was like, I feel like halfway through the game they just must have been like, we shouldn't have made you active, bud. You're gonna hurt yourself more because I can't remember how many touches he got, but it was a very small number that game that he's active with the knee injury. Then he misses. Then he's active here against the just absolutely putrid Panthers.
But the kind of context to his cheap price is that he's kind of injured.
Yeah, he was injured. We don't now. He's 3-4 weeks removed from the injury. It really there's a lot of question on how healthy he is right now. And then I think for me the bigger driver is they're going to play a real game. They're not going to play the Panthers this week. And I do think the Commanders are pretty interested in winning here. And if they don't have Jaden Daniels, like I could really see them having to lean heavily on Brian Robinson if he's healthy enough for them to do that. So I think there's quite a bit of volatility on Brian Robinson this week. You could end up with he's still not 100%. They play a strong defense. They don't have their quarterback that is making everything hum. He's just a terrible bust. Or you could end up with they have to run the whole plane is built out of Brian Robinson, and he's healthy, and he's able to get there at a pretty cheap cost. So he was one that was interesting to me. I wanted to kind of get your feeling on it though, because I'm not 100% confident on him.
Yeah, I mean, you obviously have risk there, and I'm going to I'm using the RotoViz screener here to try and I'm going to filter down to just the first 3 quarters. I don't think that's like perfect, but it gives a better sense of what happened if you just exclude the 4th quarter.
Exclude the 3rd as well. The game was over. It was super over.
Okay, I can do that. So I'm excluding the 3rd and search the database. I'll also just look at running backs. Sorry, looking up data here in real time. So you had 8 rush attempts for Brian Robinson, 2 for Eckler, 1 for Jeremy McNichols.
Okay.
So that kind of indicates that he was the primary player in the first half, and then when the game was over, that's when McNichols started playing. So that's when McNichols got 6 attempts, Eckler got 2, and Brian Robinson still got 4. So yeah, I think it's fair to say that he's very much the lead and will be in a competitive game. So I think you've got a pretty good case for the upside there, the upside scenario that you played out.
I'll enjoy drafting him for the next one day before he gets steamed up. Okay, I think we talked about Dobbins very briefly. I believe he lives on the next chart. So let's flip to the next chart real quick. Or no, sorry, he's on the previous one. I lied. I just couldn't find him. Where is he at?
He's right here.
Thank
right
you.
On
Thank
the 15.
Hiding right by Chuba Hubbard. Yeah. I mean, he's got a really good spot against this Saints run defense. Man, Saints run D has looked absolutely atrocious. And that's the thing is, that's all the Chargers want to do. This could be just one of those disgusting games where there's literally no offense outside of J.K. Dobbins. You know, like I wouldn't be surprised if you get sub 100 passing yards from the Chargers this game, because I don't think the Saints can stop them on the ground. Honestly, if you want a really interesting, is there any? I want to see. Are there any reduced slates where, like small slates where? Let's see. I want the small.
Are you saying the primary way to play Dobbins would be in a small slate?
What I actually want is I want to play both Dobbins and Vidal in the same lineup, and they are an afternoon game. So if you're a sicko that plays like afternoon only slates, I don't hate doing a Dobbins Vidal. Just this is how the Chargers move the ball. The Saints cannot stop it. And the game gets so out of hand, which I also think is very reasonable, that Vidal is getting to eat as well in garbage time. I wish this was a showdown. I mean, they'll have a small showdown slate for it. But, like, man, if this was a primetime showdown slate, I'd be jamming so much Dobbins and Vidal together. But, yeah, I think it's an interesting spot.
Yeah, makes sense for sure.
Okay, now we can actually move to the next chart. There's 2 individual running backs I want to talk about before we do our legendary running back midway through the season abouts check-in. The first one, his bubble is kind of obscuring some other bubbles here, but it's smack dab in the middle, the big green bubble of Jahmyr Gibbs. Guy's pretty efficient. Maybe the Lions should give this guy more touches. What do you think?
Yeah, obviously they established Jahmyr Gibbs this week. Worked out pretty well for them.
He looks
like
good.
a good pick. Yeah.
He delivers the explosive plays, and I know that Montgomery has delivered explosive plays in his own right. I don't want to take anything away from Montgomery, but man, just like
please take something away from Montgomery.
The danger, the threat that Gibbs poses to a defense, like if you fuck up against this guy, like it could be a house call at any, that is really tantalizing. So yeah, that's really all I had to say. Jahmyr Gibbs is really good. We had a good question from Nick in the chat.
So yeah, 5.7 yards per attempt seems good.
Yeah, we had a good price in the Dawg Bowls. Nick, it is reflective of where he's living on this chart right now. He is a mid-first rounder. So, yeah, he's going early. I've seen him go pick 6, pick 8. Yeah, you're going to have to pay up if you want Joe Mixon this week. The other guy I wanted to comment on here is a guy that's getting really good usage. He's living in this 15 to 20 expected fantasy points band. That's Tony Pollard. The problem is, and he looks efficient here because he had a couple efficient games. Really, a lot of this efficiency, like if you fixed one play here, and by fixed I mean like have any kind of effort to tackle him. But it was that play against the Colts 2 weeks ago where it's like 3rd and infinity, and they're like, I don't know, a little under 30 yards out from the end zone, and they just run a draw play because there's like no hope of actually getting a first down. They're just trying to get in closer for a field goal. So they run a draw play, and the only guy who like really gets a real chance at tackling Tony Pollard like closes his eyes, bends over 90 degrees, and just like rams him with his shoulder. No attempt to wrap up at all. And Pollard just like bounces off like, what are we doing? And just runs straight into the ends. It was like the least, not to take anything away from Tony Pollard. He did everything correct on the play, but it was like the play that least should have been a touchdown in the history of touchdowns. And it just happened to be a touchdown. I have to imagine that his expected fantasy points on that play were like under 1. And he ended up getting like 9. So that's doing a lot of heavy lifting there on the efficiency for him. But this offense is so bad. I wonder, like, can I even play Pollard with the really good role, or is this offense too shitty to realize his expected fantasy points?
Yeah, so he's been under expectation on yardage. So he's got 54 yards under expected per PFF. And then that translates to 4.3 yards per attempt. So I guess his efficiency overall, I guess, has been fine. It's been okay. Had a really bad day week 7. Really bad day. And just completely the defense just was all over him because he had 43 yards under expected this week. And then you can kind of see his overall efficiency on the season is actually kind of neutral. So you do have a good role there, but you're not seeing a lot of efficiency there. So I think that's pretty worthwhile for where he went in best ball season. But I don't know if this is like you need this guy cheap to make him work in a GPP type scoring format or tournament.
Yeah. Okay. Couple questions from the chat that I do want to answer. We've had 2 questions about Steelers running backs. Warren with 14.3 expected fantasy points last week with Russ. Do either of the Steelers RBs benefit from Russ starting over Fields? I mean, I think you get a very, very small benefit to Warren, where you're going to have less of the drop back attempts turn into quarterback rushes, and more of those will turn into checkdowns to Warren. So that's like a very small positive for him. I don't think the offense is better with Russ than with Fields. One thing I did see that was pretty interesting was the stacked box rate was substantially lower with Russ. It's kind of interesting where they the defenses were really giving Fields a lot of attention in the rushing game and stacking the box heavily when he was playing. So I guess it also is probably a slight positive for both running backs if defenses continue to play the Steelers in that way, where they don't stack the box against them and give them really light fronts.
Right. And it's hard to know how much that is like Jets kind of defensive philosophy too.
That's what I was going to say as well. It might just be a 1-game thing. And so I want to watch it. I'm not saying like this is the truth going forward, but it's something where I want to pay attention to it.
Right. If we see it again, it's a trend. Or it's enough of a trend.
Bobby Boom coming with the all caps energy in the chat. So I will answer with some all caps energy. He wants to know 2 legendary locks this weekend. Please. The man needs his legendary locks. I'll give you the first one. He's right here on the chart, and he's going to segue into the conversation about running backs with legitimate legendary upside this season. And that's Kenneth Walker. Go ahead and lock Kenneth Walker in. He is an absolute smash this week and every week. His role's incredible. insane expected fantasy points in the receiving game, which I love. The guy is game script proof, making incredible catches as well. His receiving touchdown this week, while he was absolutely burping up bourbon in the end zone from his birthday hangover. Kenneth Walker is awesome. Super fun back. Happy to see him finally getting his day in the sun this season, because I know he was a guy that a lot of people were excited about as a prospect. He's my first legendary lock of this week. And Bobby Boom, I'm going to make you stay tuned if you want the second one, because it's not a running back. But let's transition to the last thing I wanted to talk about on this chart. I want to just do our check-in. We've done this a couple times before, but I want to check in and see which of these running backs you think a legendary season is still on the table for. I think we've talked about all these guys enough that we don't need to spend a ton of time on them. I just hit me with the yes or no on them. So, number 1, Ken Walker.
Yeah.
Breece Hall.
The rest of way, yes.
DeAndre Swift.
No.
Joe Mixon.
I mean, by the numbers, it's a yes, but I don't believe it. I don't believe that this he doesn't look bad either, but I have a hard time seeing this be a thing. It could be a bias, but I have a hard time with it.
No, I think I think so much of it is on the back of volume, and then he had a couple really efficient plays against the Patriots that I just think are not something that's going to be terribly replicable, at least not at the rate that they're currently showing up in his stats. So it makes sense. All right, last one, Derrick Henry.
I think that you get enough games for the Ravens this year where it's not just establishing it, where he's probably not a legendary season. Like, it could happen, but how do they just dominate every game?
We almost had it this last game, right? He had 4 touches at the half. They're using Justice Hill a ton. What I really liked to see from the Ravens in this game was we had talked about this extensively before the season, drafting best ball teams, about how we really thought the Ravens' pass rate was going to go up this year because their defense was going to get worse, which it has. And Todd Monken is willing to pass the ball, but they just didn't need to last year. So they were beating the brakes off teams, so they ran it a bunch. And then it really felt like we were wrong, and the Ravens wanted to run it. And I mean, it kind of meshed with their behavior this offseason. You go get Derrick Henry. But this first half of this game, to me, really showed like, okay, yeah, all you need is the Ravens to be in a very competitive game where the other team looks capable of scoring points and they feel threatened. And they are not, like, they were putting Henry on ice in the first half because they're like, yeah.
Oh, yeah, the commentators were complaining about it. Why don't they play Derrick Henry more? It's a 2-minute drill. He doesn't play in 2-minute drills.
Yeah. And so to me, it was like signs of hope that you can get these huge games from the Ravens passing, like the side of the Ravens passing game can actually produce extremely well, which makes me feel like I wasn't crazy about my thesis this offseason. It's just, they just also happen to be so freaking good that it's going to be hard for them to not be in circumstances for Derrick Henry to put the game away. So that is that's the tough part. But I agree with you. It's hard for him to have a legendary season just because it's predicated on them beating the shit out of a bunch of teams, which
every team.
Now hang on though. Let me give you their upcoming schedule here, and you just let me know.
I looked at it. And
when I get to a team, they're not going to kick the shit out of because it's the Browns, it's the Broncos, it's the Bengals. The Bengals should be an electric game. I mean, we already saw a fireworks game from earlier. The Steelers, the Chargers, the Eagles could be interesting, but then the Giants, Steelers, Texans could be interesting, and then the Browns to close the season. It
doesn't take a lot to go wrong for a game to be pretty competitive, even against the worst team. It doesn't take that much to go wrong for the game to be competitive.
Yeah, or at least competitive for a half. But even
Right.
then, this game
or 3/4 of the game, or like and enough where they're not just like salting the whole game with Henry.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to the tight end charts.
Yep.
I'll let you go ahead and explain what we're looking at here.
Oh, so tight end utilization and efficiency. Here we are looking at their route percentage as a percentage of team dropbacks, what percentage of those routes are earning a target, and then how far down the field they are earning a target. And I don't think there's too many surprises on here, at least for me anyway. So I feel like we can be pretty quick here. I mean, for me, the biggest kind of note is that LaPorta has been pretty damn disappointing. It's hard to know how to parse that, but it's hard. It's even harder. To like not react. Like at this point, I think we're at panic buttons for LaPorta.
Yeah, for LaPorta, the one thing that I'll say is you do get the JMO suspension, and maybe that 2 games is enough for him to reestablish a foothold in the offense and do a little something. But I think you gotta, if you don't get anything in these next 2 games from LaPorta, it's already super concerning. Like I've got him on some FFPC, like I have him on my FFPC Fantasy Pros team. Like I don't know why I'm starting him anymore.
Right, you need a touchdown. He's just like a mid-range tight end where you hope he catches a touchdown now.
Yeah,
like mid to low even.
Doesn't seem great, right?
No. That it's almost like confirmed bad best ball pick now.
Yeah, not great. The one that I thought was really interesting, and I mean, we're going to talk about this when we get to the receivers as well, but Cade Otton really stepped up in, when the Bucs had the big target void there with Evans and Godwin going out. I mean, Godwin was actually in pretty much the whole game, and Otton was still drawing lots of volume. And this is the thing. We talked about this. We mentioned it during the offseason too. I know that I brought this up a number of times with the leg up guys when we were doing our rankings for best ball. I said, Cade Otton didn't look terribly special, to start his career here. He just looks like a guy that is on the field 100% of the time and runs all the routes. But we also need to remember he's a young player. I believe this is his 3rd year now. Young player that has managed to get on the field 100% of the time. Like, that's pretty good for a tight end. Tight end is like a notoriously slow developing position. He's on the field 100% of the time. And now you get this target vacuum here where I think Cade Otton is going to be one of the major beneficiaries. I mean, if you're hurting for a tight end, Cade Otton is one of my favorite ads this week on waivers. And he looked good too. It's not like I don't know if you were watching all of the Ravens Bucks game last night, but he looked good. He was making athletic catches. The guy survived a couple just absolute widowmaker hits too. Like I thought he was out of the game on multiple occasions.
Right.
He's kind of a stud.
He got
kind of indicate on.
Baker Mayfield threw him into some headaches.
Some major hospital balls, but yeah. So indicate on the other.
Yeah, I mean 20%. So like, here's the thing. He had 22% targets per run in the last game, which like actually isn't like that amazing. And the reason it worked out so well is because they had 52 dropbacks. And so that actually ended up being 10 targets. But it's not the first time that he's done that. If you look at week 4, where they had 51 dropbacks, he had a 19% targets per route run, 8 targets, 7 targets in week 3, 6 targets in week 6. So I think we've got enough here to say he is very like you should be actually happy to start Cade Otton, like, and that comes from somebody who didn't want to draft him much at all. Like I think this is a very viable starting tight end.
Yeah, definitely agree. This has been, I think we're seeing a couple viable starting tight ends emerge here. Hunter Henry, another one that I had a note on, looked pretty good as Drake May's primary weapon with Demario Douglass leaving due to illness early in the game. He looked pretty solid. I would not be surprised if he gives us some strong weeks here now that you have Drake Maye running the offense. The other one that this is a huge upgrade is David Njokue, because David Njokue finally has someone throwing him the ball who's a competent NFL quarterback. Now that Deshaun Watson is done for hopefully the rest of his life. But yeah, David Njokue, huge upgrade, earning lots of targets because there's no target competition.
I do think, sorry, just to go back, I do think Henry profiles is kind of spiky. Like, you had the 26% targets per run last week. Then you did have the 36% in week 2. But week 1, it was 13%. Week 3, 17, 6%, 13%, 13%. So I don't want to, like, get too carried away. Like, you want spike weeks from your tight end, especially when you get them as cheap as Hunter Henry was. But I don't want to get too carried away with the Hunter Henry stuff.
Yeah, I don't want to rely on Patriots with Jacoby Brissett data, like, hardly at all. I don't think it's going to be terribly predictive.
Well, so he started 2 games now, and the first one he was at 13% targets per run?
Right.
So even if you're throwing out the Jacoby Brissett data, the trend is continued. It's the same trend.
Yeah, that's reasonable. Yeah, it's something I want to watch, but yeah, he definitely could just be spiky. So yeah, Njokue, Henry, Otton, all really strong, emerging tight ends here. Another one that he had a really big spike week. You might say he's emerging, and his quarterback is coming back now. But I want to know, do you think this Jonnu Smith stuff is just an aberration, or is he actually going to emerge as a valuable fantasy tight end?
I think the Jonnu Smith stuff is like a function of incompetent quarterback play, where you have to decide to throw the ball down the field to Tyreek or Waddle to actually make the offense go, and instead you throw the ball to Jonnu. I don't think that's I don't think that's how this offense should work. Like, I guess it's good that he was actually so productive with those targets. It is good. And maybe that he can be the third option for the team with Chuba back. But in my opinion, if the Dolphins are going to successfully operate, it shouldn't be true Jonnu Smith.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's more,
which is how the game went the last 2 games, that's why they were so bad.
Yeah. Let's see here. The other note that I had. I think we want to go on to the backups chart here for these next guys.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Jatavion Sanders
looks pretty good.
Kind
pretty
of a
good.
thing. I want to, like, pump the brakes a little bit on him on the Jatavion Sanders exuberance, because you can basically throw out this entire game against the Commanders. It was over before it started. Deontay Johnson not fully healthy, and it seemed like the Panthers waved the white flag quite early in this one. I'm also not sure about the health of Tommy Tremble coming off the really large concussion. I do believe he was active this last week. I didn't see.
I mean, if he was active after a concussion, then he has to be fine. Like, they can't play the guy unless he's active.
Looks like he didn't end up getting any snaps, so he might have been inactive. I know he
was inactive. He was inactive. They didn't play him.
Yeah, so that's something to watch. But Jatavion Sanders looks like he might be earning more of the work there. So definitely want to keep an eye on. Mark Andrews back from the dead, getting pretty good targets per route run now, and a strong ADOT. The problem is the snaps are still not great. I mean, I think he's still
so he was out just on I got some more info on Tremble. He was out of the concussion protocol, but he had a back injury.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, so this last week likely ended up with 37 snaps, Andrews with 34. So they're right about 50-50. It's hard. I think a lot of the Andrews stuff really was because of the Flowers injury too, and it just necessitated, someone else needed to step up in the passing game. That, Bateman did a big job there, and Andrews stepped up and got his 2 touchdowns. So as much as I want to be on the Mark Andrews is all the way back train, I don't really think he's all the way back. His role is just drastically different than what we've seen in the past,
But the more he plays well, the more that because he started to see his week 1 role was actually pretty good in terms of snaps. He just wasn't earning targets because there was something wrong. But I do think the more he plays well, I think that's a positive for increasing his snap rate. He's actually played fairly decent the last 2 or 3 games. It hasn't led to the snap increase. So it might take more time.
Yeah, that's reasonable. I think that the Ravens feel like the cat is all the way out of the bag for Isaiah Likely, and that they can't keep him on the sideline. And so I think that between that and maybe a little bit of load management for Mark Andrews, it kind of seems like they are happy with how they're splitting it. I mean, I wouldn't be sad if we saw Mark Andrews get a snap increase, but yeah, I don't know. Be interesting to see how the Zay Flowers injury shapes up. Seems like it'll probably be fine. He was able to come back into the game and everything after the ankle injury. But I think that's the largest driving force behind Andrews seeing more targets. So.
Well, so he had a 25% target threat run in week 7. He had 22 in week 6 and 23% in week 5. So I think actually the underlying usage has picked up quite a bit there, even on a longer sort of time horizon.
Yeah, it's just the targets per route run are increasing, but the snaps are just not. And so
the snaps have not corresponded. You're right.
Yeah, you need the snaps for him to return anywhere close to his former glory. But all right, I just had a funny note for the last one. The great Eric All debates about who was the real Eric All Bowl seemed to be all for nothing because his average depth of target is 0.7. You had Mike Gesicki dealing with a hamstring injury this past week as well. And it really did not amount to much of anything. Eric All, 34 snaps this past week. Doesn't really do anything with it. Gesicki only 18.
Yeah. So you had week 3 and 4 with a quote unquote 40% targets per run on 24 and 30% snap rate. But then often what you'll often see those kind of players that as their roots ramp up, they don't actually earn any more targets, which I think is kind of what you're seeing there.
Yeah.
Actually, as his roots went up, his targets went down. So yeah. he other than those kind of tight end screens, he's not a target earner.
And this game against the Browns, who have a very competent pass rush, right? This would be the situation where you might expect this ultra low ADOT, chip and release type tight end to be able to get a lot of volume. Right, just that. Hey, let's beat the pass rush. Let's punish them here. The guy gets 1 target, and Gesicki is mostly out of the game. Only plays 18 snaps. So, yeah, the Eric All stuff. I mean, maybe he becomes something by the end of the season. I think your most likely outcome is that Eric All never hits the lineup of a winning team. If he is hitting your lineup in best ball. that team is already dead. So.
Right.
All right, let's move on to wide receivers and close it out here, Drico.
Yeah. I kind of want to focus on for wide receivers, unless you object. I kind of want to focus on these kind of waiver pickup guys. Like,
yeah.
I mean, maybe we can touch. Is there anybody you want to touch on briefly here for like smash GPP type plays that might be under the radar, or
I think
even not?
Yeah, I think Amon-Ra gets a legitimate bump with Jameson Williams being out and his price is not adjusted. So I'm kind of into Amon-Ra this week. They get the Titans, so it's not like the world's most exciting game, but it definitely just feels like one where, you know, he could definitely benefit from the reduced target competition there, kind of going back to the old way. Okay, here you go. You were trying to talk me into playing Bo Nix earlier. Here's how you do it. The ultimate Cortland Sutton regression spot. I mean, he's up here above 60% weighted targets per route run, in the same neighborhood as Garrett Wilson, DK Metcalf, Drake London, Amon-Ra. Like, he's a little shy of T. Higgins, but like, these are all guys that, you know, we
just to be clear, I was trying to get you to play Troy Franklin.
Well, I do think Cortland Sutton is probably a pretty interesting play this week against a really bad Panthers defense. I might sprinkle in a little Cortland Sutton here. And then I'm fast forwarding through these so we can get to the waiver guys. Okay. T. Higgins to me does not look like the wide receiver 2 on the Bengals. To me, it looks more like a 1A, 1B situation. I really expected this weighted targets per route run to kind of normalize between T. Higgins and Jamar Chase.
Where is he on this chart? He's right here. He's
right ahead of Amon-Ra as far as weighted targets per route run. Here's the only receivers in the league running the same number or more routes than T. Higgins that have a better weighted targets per route run. A.J. Brown, Malik Neighbors, Justin Jefferson. That's the list.
Right. Yeah, the contracts year narrative for T. Higgins is hitting in a big way.
Yeah, I mean, here's the other thing. Like, all the T. Higgins haters and doubters out there, like, so much of it,
of which there is one.
So much of it just comes from the fact that, like, T missed some games with injury, or T suited up for games while injured and didn't play, or played and was not 100%, so he was more of a decoy. And it's like, sure, yeah, you can. I guess you can be mad that he was out there. He's available. But, like, as far as being a good wide receiver in the NFL and being a strong fantasy producer, like, T. Higgins is both of those things. And so whatever way you want to feel about T. Higgins, like, he's a very strong NFL wide receiver playing with one of the most efficient passing quarterbacks this season. So do with that what you will. But all right, we can. Are there any of these waiver pickups on this chart, Drico, or were you wanting to go to later charts?
I'm just looking through. It doesn't look like it. It does not appear. I mean, Bateman obviously is a strong. If he's on the waivers there, you pick him up. Probably not on a lot of waivers, but
hard to know when it started though in a redraft. But yeah, worth a stash.
A lot of these guys, it's going to be hard to know when to start them. Yeah,
that's fair. I just had a couple notes on this one. First, George Pickens. We talked about how good he was. I mean, I don't think it can be overstated how good George Pickens was. Like,
and he's this dot here, the one that's all the way out here on the right.
Yeah, the one with greater than 70% weighted targets per route run. You know, the guy who looks like Nico Collins on the chart. He just hasn't realized the fantasy points yet because he has Russell Wilson and Justin Fields throwing him the ball. Man, if George Pickens, do you want to know my dirty fantasy secret fantasy? It's that.
Oh sure, tell me your dirtiest fantasy.
It's next year. George Pickens just throws such a large fit that the Steelers have to move on from him. They trade him to the New England Patriots, where I get to watch Drake Maye throw beautiful deep ball after beautiful deep ball to George Pickens, where he finishes as the overall wide receiver 1 in fantasy next season.
I mean, stranger things have happened. Stranger things have happened.
That's
But moving on from that,
yeah.
I guess the other guy we want to talk about here is Xavier Worthy, who he's actually had a pretty disappointing kind of like he was on Xavier Worthy has been and maybe still is kind of on bust watch here, where his targets per run has been really disappointing, but then it gets up to 31% in this last game, on the same route share, and he gets 8 targets with an ADOT of 16, 124 air yards, but it doesn't hit, it doesn't convert. You have to be encouraged by the increase in targets, but it's hard not to be a little bit worried about a rookie that's playing so much and then producing so little.
Yeah, the one thing about Worthy that I want to keep in context is Mahomes did miss him badly on a deep ball where he was, all you have to do is put the ball on him, it's a touchdown, And so I wonder
he missed a lot of those. He's actually missed a lot of those targets.
Yeah, how would we be feeling if Worthy, converts on that? Like if Worthy catches that, whatever it was, 60-yard touchdown this last week, like are we worried at all? That's the thing, because he could. I don't think it's unreasonable to say Patrick Mahomes, who prior to this season was in, contention for the greatest quarterback of all time, only in argument with Tom Brady. Like, I don't think it's unreasonable to say that Patrick Mahomes is able to hit that deep ball.
Right.
So, like, I think that there still could be some hope left for Worthy. I'm not willing to write it off just yet. And that's not, I don't think that's cope. I think it's just like, hey, I watched the game and like this could have gone a very, very different way. And like, I think there's shortcomings in the profile for sure. But I don't know. I'm willing to believe that Andy Reid is a good enough coach that if Xavier Worthy,
they get it figured out.
Yeah, if he is actually a very good player, like they'll get him involved and his usage will increase.
So then, is there ways that you can play this increased usage? Do you start him in fantasy? Do you take him in a Dawg Bowl?
It's pretty hard to start him in fantasy. I mean, in GPP type stuff. Yeah, in GPP.
Like this guy just got a 31% targets per run. He got 8 targets with 124 air yards, and we're like, I don't know if you can start him.
Yeah, I mean, I think in GPPs, it's probably okay to sprinkle it in, just because, the upside is very clear. It's pretty clear what the upside is. He's extremely cheap. Like the upside on Xavier Worthy is like, hello, you now have a 20-point fantasy game in one play, basically, right? And so.
So he cost 6,200 in DraftKings. So yeah, I think
probably not a DraftKings play.
You have to take him. You have to take him in the Dawg Bowl.
Yeah, if you want Xavier Worthy exposure, it's got to be on Underdog. So, all right, the guy I had on this chart, I had actually it's a matchup on this chart. It's the Jags versus the Packers. You get Brian Thomas Jr. and Jaden Reed, who are going next to each other in Underdog drafts right now. Who do you prefer in this matchup? You like Jaden Reed or you like Brian Thomas Jr.?
Those are both just like fantastic plays. Like I feel like it'd be reductive to say I like this one more. They both just look pretty fantastic. And I think I prefer, actually I'm gonna contradict myself. I think I prefer Jaden Reed. Just because that offense and that defense stinks, and Jaden Reed is so good and so established. I think. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, I agree. They're both good plays, though. The one, so last week I mentioned, I don't know if it was on Stat Chasing or if it was just on the weekly preview show that I do over on the Legendary Upside channel with Pat and Sam Sherman, but we talked about the Packers wide receivers, and last week I said I really was not super interested in Jaden Reed because he has a history of playing through injuries and really being substantially less involved when he's doing that. And I was trying hard not to like overly pattern match, but I really, I feel like we've got a decent enough sample of that happening, and it did come to fruition this last week. But he played. He didn't have an injury tag going into the game. So I've got to think that it was a relatively minor injury ankle that was hampering him. But he didn't look like himself out there too. If you watch this game, he had a drop that was uncharacteristic of him on a really challenging catch, to be fair. But so I'm willing to hope that the market is discounting him, certainly discounting his ceiling outcome, and I want to play into the fact that he's healthy this week. But to kind of throw some cold water on my Packers crystal ball on the wide receiver room, while I was right on Jaden Reed last week, I was certainly wrong about playing it through Christian Watson. I sprinkled in some Romeo Doubs as well, so I wasn't totally goosed there. But man, Doubs ended up being the one, and we'll talk more about the Packers wide receiver rotation on the next chart, because the two most important guys in that rotation as far as their impact on each other are on the next chart. All right, last one before we go to the final chart. Are you worried about Marvin Harrison Jr.?
Are we worried about Marvin Harrison Jr.? I think what you seem to be getting is this more profile of a boom bust and prayer yards guy. You have to love the rep. So he's a first round pick, so you don't have to love the rep percentage. The rep percentage is there. The targets are solid. Looks like last week there was only 30 dropbacks, and so the A.dot was actually, to be honest, the average depth of target the last couple of weeks has been 9.5, 9.8. So maybe I was just kind of thrown off by like some of the Twitter stuff. Some the stats are suggesting a player that is important to the offense because his targets per run, if you throw out week one, his targets per run look to be around 27%. So like that's pretty good on a pretty high route percentage. So like that's good underlying usage. They're not connecting on the passes. So and how do you deal with a first round pick where he's getting good usage but he's not converting? I think that's a buy low, right? I think that's a buy low where the usage is strong, or at least a lot stronger than the production. Then you're probably looking at least a good chunk of variance, and that should regress quite a bit.
Yeah, I
just talked myself all the way around. Sorry about the journey we went on there.
No, that's okay. I think that was good context. I just think you're going to end up with a guy that's going to be a lot more volatile than everyone wanted based on where they were drafting him in fantasy this year. And it's more by design in the Cardinals offense than anything to do with him. The Cardinals just don't throw the ball to the middle of the field simply because Kyler cannot see the middle of the field. Like look at where the Cardinals are passing the ball, and it's almost all to the boundary. Like they're not attacking the splash zone, which is how you deliver these big explosive plays consistently, is hitting the splash zone. And the Cardinals are not capable of doing that, which is really unfortunate. So you're just getting these higher variance outcomes where, hey, the passes, they're going to come outside the numbers, and those are harder to complete. And so you're just going to end up with larger variance there. So I did have another little tangent on Marvin Harrison that I wanted to touch on real quick, but I need you to play along with me real quick so I can make this point. If we were redrafting right now and you knew Malik Nabers was fully healthy, and let's just say that the Giants didn't lose, their offensive tackle, so they still had a somewhat intact offensive line, where would you draft Malik Nabers in best ball if you were redrafting right now?
It just assuming health and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You draft Malik Nabers in the first round.
Yeah, like clearly, right? Like easily ahead of Garrett Wilson, like probably ahead of Amon-Ra, like pretty strongly in the first round, right? And would you say that it's a reasonable assumption to say that the Cardinals offense definitely could be better than the Giants offense, both now, given what we already know, and also before the season, given what we knew about?
The Cardinals offense is better.
Okay. And so seeing this outcome for Malik Nabers, where he is very clear, not just like, oh, maybe a fringe first rounder, but like clearly a first round pick.
He's the situation.
Yeah. Knowing that Malik Nabers and Marvin Harrison Jr. were similar talent profiles, like by all metrics that you can measure them by coming out of college, like they both were elite wide receiver prospects, and even people that were Malik Nabers over Marvin Harrison Jr., of which there were some, I still think would say that the range of outcomes for both players was similar. Like, it's not like only Malik Nabers had this absolute ceiling outcome. So this is all to say that for anyone who's saying, like, I can't believe these idiots were drafting Marvin Harrison Jr. at the 1-2 turn, that's like some of the stupidest shit I've ever heard. Like, you just don't know what the fuck you're talking about, or you don't really understand what game you're playing, which, like, it's fine to be stupid. It's also fine to not understand a game. But, like, now that I'm telling you this, I'm asking you to be better. So, like, if you're one of these people that's out here saying, oh, my God, Marvin Harrison Jr. is such a dumb pick at the 1-2 turn, like, if you're doing it for engagement, I get it. Like, I know that's a thing that people like to do. But, like, I need you to be honest and do some legitimate analysis and realize, like, the range of outcomes for these players is very similar. One of them is hitting the outcome where he's very clearly a win, even if you take him at the 1-2 turn. He just happened to be the guy that was going later, and their range of outcomes was very, very reasonable to be similar. In fact, you could say Marvin Harrison Jr.'s was probably a better range of outcomes given the overall offensive environment. So I'm tired.
And the Marvin Harrison, the usage here is not that bad. Like, if you look, if you try out week 1 just because, and then week 6 because that's the one where you left with the concussion, you're looking at about 14 expected points in PPR a game, so that's about it within that filter. That is about wide receiver 18, which I get being that you have to be disappointed with that in the first round, even at the end of the first round, but it's still like it's pretty workable. It's pretty workable, and just because the points haven't been there, actually no, the points have kind of been there, but they just all happened in week 2. So outside of week 2, they've been weak. I think you're still gonna get the week 2 outcomes where he scores some deep touchdowns or he gets a lot of big plays. It's not going to happen at the rate that you need at the pick he went, but it's still fine. It's not great, but it's still fine.
Yeah, I really wanted to make a point for anyone that was struggling with, like, understanding why he was going there, like, simply look at Malik Nabers, and, like, I'm just asking people who are saying, like, oh, what a silly pick, like, I need you to do some earnest analysis, and, like, if it's just for clicks, like, that's okay. But, like, I'm telling you, like, do better, put some legitimate analysis out there. Like, it is foolishness to say that it was bad process to draft Marvin Harrison at the 1-2 turn. Like, and if you disagree with that, like, I'll see you in the streets next year, and I hope you up your volume. You know, that's all I have to say about that. All right, we can go to the last chart now.
Okay, so now we can talk about the show headliners.
So I'm going to let you. Why don't you lead on these guys here, Drico?
Okay, so I think I've talked about Troy Franklin enough. I actually think he's probably got the strongest usage of any of the rookies. You have the problem that his quarterback sucks. We kind of discussed that, but really like that usage. The next guy is the 49ers guy, Ricky Pearsall. And I think if you're taking Pearsall or you're unloading the clip on Pearsall, you need to squint a lot because a lot of his underlying metrics were actually not no, you only have last week, and he was probably maybe thrust into the game quicker than they intended given his recovery and all that kind of stuff. But on an 84% Reds run, he had just 16% targets per out run and 7 yards per reception and an 8 out of 8. So I think you have to squint when you take him and say, oh, they're still ramping him back up. He was kind of thrust into the limelight. But to me, that's actually kind of a concern. The one that I would actually kind of like, the other 49er that I'd actually consider on waivers would be maybe Juwan Jennings. Even though his routes still stayed at 55% last week, his targets per out run has been good, and so I could see that him being like a $1 or cheap pickup that goes more under the radar. What are you? I know I just talked a lot there. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so you're not interested at all in Jacob Cowing?
Oh yeah, sorry, you're right. Here's the other guy. He slipped my mind. Let me dig into him for a second. So Jacob Cowing. So he played for the first time last week, and he had a 22% route rate. So yeah, he's pretty clear the pretty clear tree. He did have a 25% target per out run. So on a more, and then his average depth of target was 17. So he didn't have that many routes, but he got some deep shots. He actually got 50 yards. So he arguably played a lot better than what's his name? Ricky Pearsall. Rizzy P. And so he could be a more under the radar guy. I think he's like maybe a stash. Another guy where it's like maybe a $1, and if you have room on your bench, you can like watch it play out. But not playable right now.
Yeah.
But that could change. That could change very rapidly.
Yeah. I'm interested in all the 49ers receivers. I think they're all good stashes. Ricky Pearsall obviously coming off, being shot. So I'm not wanting to bury him after just one game. And I think that, the roles are up for grabs here with the 49ers injuries. I think that Cowing is probably more of just like a deep shot burner. He's a pretty small guy. He's really fast. I was wondering how the Niners would deploy him, if they'd use him as more of like a, quick hitter, quick slant type of guy, or if he was going to just be like take the top off the defense, kind of like they've done in the past with, some of their guys like Ray McLeod and, whatever, Gray. I can't remember the first name of that other player, but anyway, like they've done in the past with some of those guys. But I think Cowing's probably like the deep guy there. I've got another. So I guess let's talk about the other really clear waiver guys, the Sterling Shepard, Jalen McMillan bunch. How are you playing those? Do you have a preference between one or the other on waivers?
So I think you do have to go with Jalen McMillan. I think you have to prefer him. So if you're looking at the routes, in week 7, McMillan had a 60% and a 26% targets per run. His average depth of target was 14.4. So and so a lot of those did end up being prayer yards. So I guess you do have to take that with a grain of salt, but and maybe he doesn't they don't add the underneath stuff to him. They just continue with being the Rashad White and Cade Otton's. But I have to think that given they already liked him, they're already targeting him heavily, that maybe they figure out a way to get him more involved in intermediate and short stuff. Then after that, you've got Sterling Shepard. So his targets per run was just 4% in week 7. And hold on while I want to look up his full season. So Sterling Shepard. So he played at a similar rate to McMillan last night, but they hardly targeted him. And so his targets per run on the full season is just 9%. So I don't think that's like a viable. And then the other guy is somebody who plays a lot, but it's wins sprints, and that's Trey Palmer.
Yeah.
So I think Jalen McMillan is your only real clear shot here.
Yeah, I agree. You got to take the swing for the upside with McMillan. I wouldn't be terribly surprised if we see Shepard end up getting a bunch of little dink and dunk type targets. But I mean, if you really want my prediction for what happens in this offense, it's that the running backs all see more usage. They just lean into the running game more. Cade Otton gets a lot of the work. And then if someone else can emerge in the receiving game, the Bucs will take it. And I think your best bet for that is McMillan. But all right, the other guy on this chart that I wanted to note, Demario Douglass. Okay, if Demario Douglass is on your waivers right now, this is probably like a home league thing. I doubt he's on waivers and any FFPC high stakes type stuff. But if Demario Douglass is on waivers right now, you've been given an enormous gift, because he was absolutely cooking to start the game and then left really early with illness. He was just too sick to keep playing. Guy has that dog in him. He went out there, probably was pooping his pants on the field. Didn't matter to him. He was just racking up catches. He's very clearly Drake May's favorite target. I spent way more time than I'd like to admit watching Drake Maye clips and highlights this offseason, trying to understand why Pat was so enthused with him. And I drank all the Kool-Aid after watching, because he seems like a fantastic fantasy quarterback. If you watched a bunch of Drake Maye highlights, you'll notice that, man, did that guy like Josh Downs. And Demario Douglass is getting used just how he used Josh Downs when they played together in college. And it just, I've just seen it before from watching this guy, and it seems like Demario Douglass is going to be his first read and second read. I think Demario is going to eat. And also, we've seen him be good in a dysfunctional offense before. Like last season, the Patriots were putrid, and Demario Douglass still found a way to be somewhat useful. I mean, he wasn't a world beater by any means, but he was the only productive guy they had. So I think that speaks a little bit to the player's skill. So Demario Douglass, I think, is a really, really strong add. And he's also someone I want to aggressively target in DFS formats prior to the cat getting out of the bag. Don't love it this week against the Jets. But man, I hope that the Patriots get a matchup against a really good offense and hopefully a questionable defense soon, so I can jam some Demario Douglass.
Yeah, makes sense for sure. Makes sense for sure. I think that about covers us, right? Pretty substantial show.
I had one last one, but I'll be quick because I know we've gone long. Christian Watson and Dontavion Wicks. I know there's lots of conversation about how is this how is the wide receiver room in Green Bay going to work out? Who's taking from who? How does the rotation work? The rotation looks relatively clear to me right now because there have been injuries and the weird suspension. I still want to watch stuff, but what it looks like to me is Dontavion Wicks and Christian Watson are the two that rotate. If you look at the snap share stuff, looks like Dobbs and Reed are on the field pretty much all that. Like they're not losing snaps because of other players. It's Wicks and Watson who see their snaps decrease because of the other. So those are the two that cannibalize each other. It's not to say they both can't get there in a game either. That's the tricky part. It's just they're the ones that are harmed and that benefit the most from changes in this wide receiver room. So you get an injury to anybody. It doesn't just have to be Wicks or Watson getting injured. You get Reed out, you get Dobbs out. Wicks and Watson are the two that benefit the most because they'll see the largest increase in routes. So I just wanted to point that out. I think this week, figuring out how to play the Packers wide receivers is really important because it's a really good matchup at the highest total on the slate. For me personally, I want to play it through Jaden Reed. And then I think that with Wicks and Watson, I really only want to play those guys stacked with Jordan Love because I think that if they're going off, it's likely that they're getting there through like a big touchdown or a lot of efficiency, which is going to benefit Love more. And then I think with Reed and Dobbs, you potentially can have those guys get there as one-offs. So I'm okay to play them in one-offs in a really good game environment. But Wicks and Watson, I really want to pair with their quarterback. All right, I think that's everything, Draco. We did it.
Okay. Thanks everyone for joining us for week 7, going on to week 8 of stat chasing, and we'll see you again next week.